Welcome to another installment of Judas Maccabeus. Today I'm going to discuss something that's been mentioned many times. I've been dying to make this video. It's one of the reasons I made this channel, and that's because I'd like to do an expose on the truth about the Talmud. All right. What I'm going to say will probably upset people on all sides of the spectrum. Many of my fellow Jews won't like this, but also many of you guys at the fringe right will find a lot of your theories about us and about our civilization probably needs to be rethought. So, the argument usually is that a series of statements, quotes from the Talmud, are presented, and the quotes do not look pretty. There would be things like, oh, it's okay to steal from non-Jews, or Gentile women are a perpetual state of impurity, or Jesus is being punished in some horrible way for being the false Messiah, etc., etc. Different distasteful things, all right? You're allowed to kill non-Jews. All these really troubling statements. Some of them are false, but enough of them are true for it to be deserving of a response. And this here is my response and my explanation of this issue. I'm going to say, though, first of all, that I am qualified to do this because I speak Judeo-Aramaic. I read that language. I've been studying the subject for well over 15, almost 20 years. And it's a subject that I'm very passionate about. I spend a lot of time studying it. I've been ordained as a rabbi in the past, so I'm well qualified to voice an opinion on this, and this is me doing so, all right? The truth is that in any of these subjects, you really need you need historical background to understand these things. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and I'm going to use an analogy from the United States legal system to make it easier to understand, okay? I'll start off by saying that the Talmud is not a holy book. It's not even a religious book per se. It's a legal compendium of hundreds and thousands of arguments that were dutifully recorded by the stenographer that had to record the official proceedings of the court. And any statement that was made in this court was recorded in these notes, and the Talmud is the collection of these notes. And when we study the Talmud, you're studying the notes, but you're tracing the legal path of how people reached a certain conclusion, okay? That's just what it is. So an analogy would be that the way this is how Jewish law works, but it's also how American law works to a large extent. The United States has a constitution. The Constitution of the United States is the basis for all law. But the individual citizen does not get to interpret the Constitution. So if I live in New York City and I carry an assault rifle in Times Square, when I get arrested, which inevitably will happen, I can't stand in front of the judge and tell him that my interpretation of the Constitution is that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, and you're infringing on my right to bear arms. The reason I can't do that is not because I'm wrong, but because it's the Supreme Court of the United States that gets to define the parameters of the constitutional rights, and they've decided to give the states the rights to adjudicate what the right to bear arms is. So if New York City, the state, decided not to give me the right to bear arms in that way, but I need to get a license or a special approval or whatnot, then I'm bound by their interpretation of the Constitution. I can't use mine. Talmudic law is a very similar system. It's a system where the Bible can say, do not work on the Sabbath. So we all know not to go, Jews don't go to work on the Sabbath, but the question is, what exactly does it mean to not work on the Sabbath? it's something that every legal system has to deal with, right? Can I cook for my family? Is that considered working? Can I prepare food for? Can I cater? My daughter is getting married. Can I cater the event and cook all Sabbath so that the wedding on Saturday night will be nice, right? Or would that be considered work? So these are questions that are addressed by any legal system regarding any basic law, right? Don't eat pork. So, okay, I can't eat pork, but what if there's pork gelatin in marshmallows? Is that not allowed, right? So it's a question that would be addressed. Some of them are obvious what the answer would be, some would not be obvious. So the Talmud is basically rabbis analyzing the biblical text and trying to apply those laws in changing times. Okay? Now, what is the Talmud itself? Like, who wrote it? So there's a lot of history to get into, and I'm going to try to keep it short but to the point. So Rabbinic interpretation has been going on since the time of Moses. Even in the Old Testament, you see Moses would, come with this revelation from God, but then a thing would happen that didn't fall into the exact category of the Mosaic revelation, and then he would have to make a decision, how he's going to deal with it, right? So a procedure was developed for these decisions. The procedure was you'd have a court, and all the intellectual elite, the jurists, would get together and debate. That to have a free debate, you couldn't suppress any opinions, right? They all agreed that the Torah was divine. They all agreed that was from God, but then they agreed that they're going to do their best to interpret in the spirit of the Old Testament. They're going to interpret the law based on that. And then they voted on it. If they had a disagreement about how to apply these things, they would vote on it. And the conditions were that you needed to have the majority of the people behind you, right? The people had to accept these jurists, and they did. So rabbinic activity took place from the year, I would say 250 years before the Common Era, before Jesus, and it went on for 400 years after. So we're looking at a period of 650, 700 years of the official rabbinic period. And there were several different Talmudic compendiums, right? There's two main ones. There's the Jerusalem Talmud and there's the Babylonian Talmud. And they're both doing the same thing. They're both just the minutes of the court of successive courts of the Jewish nation deciding how to apply biblical and rabbinic law in changing times. That's the definition of what the Talmud does. And in that context, you'll find that because it's a free expression, right? So all comments and opinions were considered valid. So, or at least they had to, even if they were invalid, they had to be given the room on the floor, Senate floor. So, if people would often make a very disturbing comment, but that comment had to be recorded in the official text, and then they would either, they would not rule that way if they felt that comment was inappropriate. Okay, so that would explain why, in general, you would find objectionable things, because anybody can speak there, anybody can make a comment, anybody can express himself. So you're going to have expressions that are kind of troubling, right? If you follow the stenographer's notes on the Supreme Court, any Supreme Court decision in the United States, you'll find disturbing things as well. And it would be easy to take little bits and pieces and make it look even worse. That being said, I'm going to later on, go through some examples. But before that, I just want to say why, personally, I love the Talmud so much, and why I spend so much of my own time researching and studying the methodology and the work of the Talmud. Because from a legal perspective, it's beautiful to me to watch how, because I'm a believer, I believe in God and I believe in the Torah, so just to see how we humans are trying to live the covenant and how we're trying to interpret it in ways that would make sense in modern times, that's a very interesting process. And even myself, I'm in awe of the Talmudic text. I don't always agree with the conclusion, but again, they're not divine conclusions are human conclusions. This is where the human and the divine sort of meet. And it's just kind of like why it's so cool to me. And I'll also say that like the rabbinic culture that produced the Talmud brought something new to the world, and this is the one I want to explain here. It brought something new to the world that contributed enormously to the Jewish people and to the world at large, and this is what it is. I'm going to explain it now. You see, every civilization has categories of what makes a person elite, what makes a person great, what brings a person honor among his peers. So, sometimes they have several different things, but they basically fall into 3 or 4 categories. Category 1 is nobility. If you're royalty in England, right? If you're a duke, if you're a lord, if you belong to the nobility, you have status. That's a status symbol, right? So it's just hereditary status symbol. It doesn't mean anything about you, but the fact that you have this hereditary status, that gives you greatness. Another thing would be martial power. You could have no great family, and you could not be a great guy in your personal life, or no great ethics, not educated or anything, but you could be very good at war, good at killing people, and that gives you status. That's like another status symbol in the ancient world, and even today, right? We honor great generals, we honor great warriors. I mean people in the West and the East and everywhere. It's another status symbol. That's paradigm of, like the warrior paradigm. The other one is money. If you're wealthy, you can be a complete crude bastard, but if you have money, it gives you status. It allows you to do things that if you didn't have money, you wouldn't be able to do. So the Talmudic civilization, rabbinic civilization, what they did was they got rid of all those 3 things. They made it very clear that they didn't care how wealthy you were. They didn't care how militarily able you were, and they didn't care even if you were the high priest himself. They had 2 categories they wanted you to excel in, and if you excelled in these categories, you were considered the elite. You were considered the pride of Israel, the greatness of Jacob, which was education and ethics. In Hebrew, it's Torah and mitzvot. Torah is like the word of God, which is education. It was a code name for all sorts of educations: scientific, medical, mathematical, and ethics. You had to be ethical. Your deeds had to be worthy of emulation. Now, you see this a lot in Talmudic text. If you study it and you get into it, you see that the people that are involved in debates with each other that are considered great rabbis range from the wealthiest to the poorest. You have some of them that were shoemakers who were minimum wage, and you had some that were enormously wealthy. But the shoemaker would easily would often be right, and there would be no favoritism shown to the guy who owns shipping companies and insurance companies or whatever it was. You also find that the high priest himself, if he wasn't learned or he was considered unethical in his private life, even during the temple service, nobody would pay any attention to him. But if one of the sages came in who came from like really lowly background, everybody would get up for him. So they kind of switched the normal humanities approach to who the elite of their people is and turned it into something worthy of emulation. And that also had an effect on our gene pool to an extent, because now the people that are considered most desirable were the scholars, right? And that created like a high IQ nation, because now scholars are marrying daughters of scholars, and it created a funnel effect. And all the discussions about Jewish IQ, this was a large part of it. It's not the only factor, but it's one of them. So that's why I feel so close to this issue, and I really appreciate it. And there are other things as well that I love about the Talmud, but my defense of it here is just that, again, in summary, it's not a religious work, it's a legal work, okay? Therefore, it's not holy. Not everything in the Talmud can be emulated. We don't do that. We don't have that in our culture. It's not like in the Quran where, the prophet did something, we all follow him. No. If someone in the Talmud did something that's inappropriate, it gets called out in the Talmudic text itself, or we know it's not appropriate, we don't follow it. The other thing is that, the conclusion is not always, not every statement is a conclusion, not every statement is definitive. These are statements that are leading up to this conclusive argument, and if when taken in a whole, is beautiful. Because even in these arguments, sometimes people will quote an extreme, ridiculous version of one argument in order to get to another. So that's kind of very important. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some quotes that are often used about how terrible the Talmud is. I'm going to explain them in the original context, maybe even the original language, and give it some, and treat them individually. Sorry guys, I'm on Stormfront. It's a ridiculous site, but I'm on it because they are always attacking the Talmud, so I'm just going to take the first 5 statements. I'm going to explain them in the correct context, all right? Hope you find this interesting. The first one, if a Jew is tempted to do evil, I don't like this translation, I'm going to go with it. He should go to a city where he is not known and do the evil there. Ma'ed Katan 17a is the source. Okay, so the context is a common sense advice. It's not law either. It's not even a legal thing. It's just common sense. If you're a degenerate pervert, you're gonna go to a strip club, you're gonna go to a prostitute or whatever, don't do it in your own town. Don't shit where you eat, right? It's forbidden. You're degenerate. You should be ashamed of yourself for doing something so disgusting. But do it in a place where no one knows you, okay? And don't bring shame on your family, right? Bad enough you're doing it. You don't have to shame your siblings and your parents and make everyone look bad. It's kind of advice. It's the first one. I don't see the problem here, morally, ethically. It is what it is. All right, next one, number 2. If a heathen, Gentile, in Aramaic is Abed Kochavim, but whatever, it hits a Jew, the Gentile must be killed. Hitting a Jew is the same as hitting God. Sanhedrin 58b. So, again, everything got to take into context. The author lived in Palestine, like after the destruction of the temple, and there was a lot of strife going on between the Jewish tribes that were allowed, the Jewish hills people that were allowed to remain, and the locals were trying to take over the Jewish towns and take advantage of their military defeat. Constant strife, constant warfare. And in the context of war, if you're hit by the enemy, don't just take it lying down. You got to kill him. You can't let him hit you. So that's the other one. The third one, a Jew need not pay a Gentile the wages owed him for work. That's a forgery. It's not what it says at all. It's ridiculous. You have to pay a Gentile the work. If not, the Jewish court will penalize you. This is a complete forgery. When a Jew murders a Gentile, there will be no death penalty. When a Jew steals from a Gentile, he may keep. Again, this is back to the same subject when we talk about the death penalty, right? So we kill you for committing murder, right? What if you kill an enemy in a war? Is that murder? No, it's not murder. Now, it's obvious here, but it has to be recorded in law. We're not talking about any Gentile. We're talking about Gentiles who we happen to be at war with, okay? All Gentile children are animals. Nonsense. Okay, number 8. Let's do one more. Gentile girls are in a state of nida, filth, from birth. Avodah Zarah 36b. That's actually not a bad translation, besides for the filth, which I put in parentheses. Nida is a menstruating woman. Jews have laws that you're not allowed to have sexual relations with a menstruating woman. Not only that, if you're going to go to the temple, you can't come into contact with something impure, and menstruating women would render you impure from going to the temple. Or then the menstruating woman herself can't go to the temple. She needs to, by temple, I don't mean it's where we pray, I mean where we sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem. So a Gentile woman is in a perpetual state of impurity because the way to become purified from menstruation is by going through these ritual baths in live springs with rainwater. It was a system to make, so which was considered hygienic, and Gentiles didn't have access to these things. So your assumption is a Gentile woman is always impure. Okay, now if a Gentile woman wanted to go to the temple, she would go through the same purification process, and she'd be welcomed at the Jewish temple as well, making this another out of context approach to make the Talmud look bad. And if you have any questions or any quotes you want me to treat individually, I'll be glad to do so if you post it in the comments. I hope this is helpful. I mean, this is a subject I'm very passionate about, and if this helped anyone, let me know in the comments. I'll be very happy. Thank you. Bye. May God help us all.